Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the London School of Economics and to this event, What is Wrong with Britain and Can Social Democracy Fix It? My name is Peter Ramsey. I'm a professor of law at the Law School in the London School of Economics. But this event is not organised by me or the Law School, it's organised by a student group called Gulf Matrix. And I'll introduce you to Harry, who's gone in a second, to tell you about that. Any public meeting, whether it's organised by students or academics or whomsoever at LSE, has to be chaired by an LSE academic, and that's my role tonight. So I'm the academic chair for the event, and I will be chairing it as we go, the Q&A and so on. I do have to tell you the housekeeping details. Remember to turn your mobile phones off or to silent, if you would. The fire exits, there's one back there, and there's one there, and one there. If you do, in the unlikely event of us having to evacuate the building, you are asked to, this will lead you straight to the assembly point one at the back, but the two, you have to go out the front of the building, turn left, and then right, down all which a little bit, and then turn right, and there's an area off the street where you can assemble, and that's what I'm advised to tell you. And that's the housekeeping, I think. So now I'll invite Harry Tom from the Student Society Gov Matrix just to introduce the event to you.
Distinguished guests, members of the LSE community, friends from across the world, ladies and gentlemen. After decades of pursuing neoliberal policies, there's a widespread belief that Britain is at a crossroad, and I quote, mired in a stagnant economy with decaying public services and infrastructure and a political system facing yet another round of popular rebellion. According to Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, Brexit has resulted in a £140 billion loss for the British economy and a 6% decline. London itself saw its economy shrink by £30 billion, with the salaries of average Londoner declining as well. And while COVID-19 hit all economies relatively hard, compared to the pre-pandemic era, the British economy is performing the worst among the G7. Now here's the interesting thing. Ahead of the 2024 general election, Keir Starmer promised to fix broken Britain, which is a similar promise to David Cameron in 2010 as the leader of opposition, when he assured the voters that he will be the man to fix a country that is badly in need of repair. So what is wrong with Britain? Are the problems simply superficial or systemic? Is there still hope? Is the claim broken Britain simply a phrase just for politicians to exploit? What are the possible remedies? Welcome to today's event. What went wrong with Britain? Can social democracy fix it? Today's event will be in two parts. In the first part, we're honored to have Lord David Owen, who will be interviewed by Mr. Rod Liddle. They're here on the stage. For the second part, we're delighted to be joined by an expert panel. Each panelist will give a 5-minute speech. Then the audience will have plenty of opportunities to ask questions to all panelists. Now I'd like to briefly introduce Lord David Owen, who is on the left. Lord David Owen is the former Foreign Secretary. He's the founder of the Social Democratic Party, member of the House of Lords since 1992, and a member of Parliament since 1966. He started with a professional career as a physician. He joined the Labour Party in 1960, and he qualified as a doctor in 1962. He was elected as a Labour MP in 1966. And during his decade-long career in Cabinet and Shadow Cabinet, Lord Owen served as Shadow Energy Secretary, Parliamentary Under-Secretary for the Royal Navy, Minister of State for Health, Shadow Foreign Secretary, Foreign Minister, and in February 1977, at the age of 38, he became the youngest ever Foreign Secretary of this country. He currently shares this record with Anthony Eden. Lord Owen served as Foreign Secretary under James Callaghan's government until May 1979, and in 1981, Owen was one of the gang of four who left the Labour Party to found the Social Democratic Party, the SDP. And among SDP's other founders were Rowan Jenkins, who later became the President of the European Commission, a role currently held by Ursula von der Leyen. Also Bill Rogers, who became the Transport Secretary, and Shirley Williams, who became the Education Secretary. Lord Owen led the SDP from 1983 to 1987, and again from 1988 to 1990. From 1992 to 1995, Lord Owen served as the EU peace negotiator in the former Yugoslavia. He became the Chancellor of the Liverpool University between 1996 and 2009. He's been serving as an MP, and he's been serving as an MP between 1966 and 1992. Served in the House of Lords from 1992 to 2024 as a life peer. He's a first-hand eyewitness and a direct participant of British politics for over 60 years. These are the 60 most turbulent years for Britain and for the world. Lord Owen will be interviewed by Mr. Rod Liddle, who is an LSE alumnus, an associate editor of The Spectator. He was an editor of BBC Radio 4's Today programme and a renowned author for many books and TV series. And he currently writes for The Sunday Times, The Spectator and The Sun, among other publications. Now, let us welcome them tonight.
Thank you very much. That was lovely. And welcome here this evening to talk about whether social democracy is the answer to anything. I've been a member of the party for 6 years. And I'm sure the answer will be forthcoming one day. Anyway, it is almost 24 years, almost in a very week, since the Social Democratic Party was first formed, when the then David Owen, the brightest hope of that previous Callaghan Labour government, left Labour, and as a gang of four with Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams and the other one, shifted the UK's political map on its axis. The spur for this has been Labour's drift to the kind of social left and its infiltration by militant tendency. The party attracted MPs from both Labour and the Tories. A coalition with the Liberals followed, and at the 1983 general election, this coalition gained only a fraction short of 8 million votes and gained 23 seats. Right from the beginning, though, it was difficult to know what was meant by the term social democrat. It wasn't really the old Marxist construct, nor really did it seem wholly akin to the parties on the continent at that time, which called themselves Social Democrats. It's further complicated by my suspicion, at least, that Lord Owen would today be on the opposite side of many of the arguments put by Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams and the other one. Defining what is meant by a social democrat has taxed David Owen. 30-odd years ago, he addressed the issue and perhaps alighted upon this chimeric disposition as being a kind of definition in itself. It is a pluralist philosophy, David argued, and quoted from the exiled Polish philosopher Leszek Kolakowski, who in 1970 wrote, "The trouble with the social democratic stock and idea is that it does not sell any of the exciting ideological promises which commodities various totalitarian movements, communists, leftists, offer fascists, or dream-hungry human misery youth. It is no ultimate solution for all and misfortunes. It has no prescription salvation of mankind." I guess you might see the ghost of Edmund Burke floating around somewhere in this, as well as that of Karl Popper. More recently, Lord Owen is reported as having described himself as a populist. I don't know if that's true. Yes, good. It's always nice to be correct, isn't it? As a populist, and many of the social democratic parties on mainland Europe have travelled a little down that route, the populist route, to electoral success, most notably in Slovakia with the Social Democrats led by Robert Fico. Well, here with me to wrestle with this issue is one of the undoubted major figures in British post-war politics. A brilliant foreign secretary, a party leader, and since fading away of the SDP at the turn of the 1990s, a man who has remained at the very centre of European politics during its years of post-Soviet and post-Tito crises. He is, to my mind, along with Ernest Bevin, the greatest Prime Minister we never had. So, David, Lord Owen, welcome. Thank you for being here. I wonder, that point highlighted on there, that it's very, very difficult to define what social democracy is. And it's probably posited that on many of the central issues which face us today, you would probably now be on a different side, certainly to Roy Jenkins, and probably Shirley Williams. This may be presumptuous.
I was always on a different side. Roy Jenkins was a very distinguished Liberal. And when he came back from being president of the Commission, I begged him to join the Liberal Party and not join us, because he would have added great style and quality. And David Steele was quite happy to step down and let him be the leader, and he might have been able to achieve his ambition, which was to become Prime Minister. He was no man in a hurry at that stage, and he was not really welcome. The best way of launching the SDP was the original Gang of Three, which was Shirley Williams, who's a real social democrat, and Bill Rogers, who you referred to as the other man. But don't ever underestimate Bill. Bill had deep-seated roots in the Labour Party and in the north of England, and he agonized over coming. I didn't agonize by then. I wanted to break, but he agonized, and he's still alive, and he is a good man.
He is a good man, and was my constituency MP for a while up in Middlesbrough, Stockton-on-Tees. What was it then, at that point? Was it simply a reaction and a dissatisfaction with the way in which the Labour Party was going, as well as a dissatisfaction with the wild shores of Thatcherism, which we were seeing?
Well, you have to remember that Shirley Williams was on the National Executive Committee, and she was living with this nightmare of a Labour Party that had decided to become unilateralist again, forgetting all the lessons of the Gateskill period and the fight for keeping a serious defence policy. And also, I think it was pretty important that Shirley Williams had actually been on the National Executive. And so she'd seen, hour by hour, day by day, all funny games, dirty tricks, really dissolute politics, really, of the National Executive.
Dissolute from the left.
Dissolute from any values, I would say. I mean, if it was a lousy Labour Party that we've had at that juncture. We've had very good Labour parties, very good Labour parties. And it was a very bad Labour Party, and rotten to the core, frankly. And you only could break it.
So this was more than militant tendency, it was more than Derek Hatton,
yes.
And it was more than Tony Benn.
Oh yes, in many ways Tony Benn was, he went through a bad period at that time, but he had been, broadly speaking, a decent person who had strong views and argued for them. But he went wrong during that period and started flirting with, he was not a natural lefty in the sense, he was actually rather right-wing on quite a lot of things.
Well, that's an energy to say.
Yes, but he went wrong, the party went wrong, it could only be rescued by a breakaway. And I think it was rescued by a breakaway. It took time, but it was rescued by a breakaway.
And when this party was formed, what did you see as being, if it had any, the core principles of social democracy?
I think it is this readiness to erode by inches. You don't have to take great big steps. You can take small, consistent, and difficult issues on with more effect, really, than the grand slam or thing like this. I think there is something disciplined about social democracy, and always has been. And I think its roots are in the philosopher Popper. And I think the more you look at Popper's philosophical position, I think it helped social democracy to have this roots in a very profound thinker.
And at the time, this was at times, you say, a plea from the left for unilateral disarmament, and indeed from the centre of the Labour Party in many cases. So actually on policy terms, you'd have been more nationalist, is a difficult word to put it, but more cognizant of the nation state than an internationalist position, I suspect.
Yes, I think that we saw that during the Falklands. I mean, the Falklands came at a bad time for the newly launched SDP. But I mean, somebody like Bill Rogers was a very committed believer in defence, serious defence, and careful, cautious. And I think that it was a difficult issue for us because we were solidly in support of defeating the Argentinians. And I don't think Rod was. Jenkins. And I think people picked that up. Bill Rogers compensated for that in a very real way inside the gang of Falklands.
Well, I remember at the
Shirley Purley, she was okay on defence. There was no question about that. I think she was torn a bit on the Falklands. It was a tricky issue, to be blunt. But, you know, look at the sort of arguments. Should you have sunk the ship? Yeah. You'll find out more, for God's sake. And the admirals come and tell you they need it out. It's dangerous. You're not really going to spend too much time arguing which direction it is, exactly where it was in relationship to the no-fly zone. You're in a war.
But I do remember from that time as well that there were clips often played of radio stations from Buenos Aires, and you would hear this burst of Spanish, and then you would hear Mr. Tony Benn, and then a quote from Tony Benn, and it was very popular at the time. But moving on, there are other things which, you know, one of the reasons I joined the Social Democrats was that it felt to me that the Labour Party, partly under Tony Benn, largely under Tony Benn, but also later, obviously under Jeremy Corbyn, had become distanced from what I thought the Labour Party had been set out to do, which was to look after the poorest of society. And had become what some people on the continent, some of the people like Robert Fisher indeed, call kind of enthralled by the lifestyle left. It went down a track of not working primarily to ensure that the poorest of us got a better deal, but that it got itself involved in identitarian politics and all that kind of stuff. I assume you were never along. I assume you were never a party to that business.
Well, I was Minister of Health for nearly 3 years. It was the best job I've ever had in government. Better than being Foreign Secretary. Better than being Foreign Secretary. I made more changes in how to deliver health care during that period of time than any other period of time. It was extremely exciting. We had a fantastic group of civil servants who wanted to make this change. Barbara Castle wanted pension reform. She was my boss. And as far as I was concerned, I used to give her 2 press releases a day. And she was happy. And, you know, she was no pushover. I mean, if you went to her with her policy, she had a view that I was slightly soft. So I realized that what my best thing to do is that I would toughen up my position slightly so she could make some adjustment and get it about right. Also, I had Brian Abel Smith helping me with her authority. So more or less, anything Brian Abel Smith and I wanted to do in the health service, we could do. And we did it, and we made huge and make some wonderful changes in healthcare. Not least trying to take money away from London and to get it out into the country through this complicated formula, which we did with the civil service. It dropped, of course, as soon as I left, because it was a wonderful time. Minister of Health. So many things that we were able to do.
This was under Wilson.
Wilson, yes, Wilson said to me, David, I want to make you Minister of Health. So I said, well, who's going to be my boss? And he said, Barbara. And I said, Barbara's going to be Secretary of State for Health and Social Services, and she's interested in services. And you're asking me as an undersecretary to go and deal with the BMA. They'll throw me out on my ear. Yes, but I think that's almost a bad thing for the BMA. I'm a lapsed doctor.
but really more up to date than the last 20, 30 years of the Labour Party. And I think this is the reason so many of us, 2, 3, 4,000, joined what was the remnants of your old party, was a feeling that Labour had lost its focus and that it had become wrapped up in a politics which was of no consequence to the vast majority of its voters. Would you concede that? Do you think that's a point?
Well, Pinocchio, as I used to call him rather unkindly, I think just simply was never going to be accepted as Prime Minister of this country.
Good man.
Maybe. He had firm views and were left-wing views, and he probably changed too much. He accommodated too much. He began to look tarnished, and I think that was a very difficult issue for him. But the country had made up their mind. They weren't ever going to make him Prime Minister.
And Tony Blair?
Well, Tony Blair is a very interesting figure. You can't deny that. And he made some radical changes as Prime Minister, which were beneficial. His problem was that he took this country to war over the possession of nuclear weapons, and there were no nuclear weapons. Now, you can't take a country to war on a false premise and expect to remain Prime Minister when everybody's conceded that it was a false premise.
Sometimes he did.
Some, of course, did approve.
No, I mean, he did remain Prime Minister. But it was...
But he was never... He stayed on, and then Gordon Brown was pressing around every day, and eventually he had to step down. A lot of good things were done under Tony Blair, but you can't do this. You can't go to war on a false premise. Sorry, that's not on, and that's why they threw him out. But I think he tried hard. He was a social democrat. I'm not saying he was a Tory. I don't think he
was a Tory. But if you look at what's happened to politics since around about, I guess, in the year 2000, and it began in the 1990s, you suddenly had the growth of what were called populist parties in Europe. And some of them left-wing, such as Syriza in Greece. Some of them both left and right-wing, such as the Social Democrats in Slovakia, and arguably the Front National in France. Some of them patently right-wing, such as the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany. But many of them espousing values which seems to us, and seems to many of us, would have found a home in the Social Democratic Party. That there was, if you look at, for example, Slovakia, there is a redistributive policy and a policy of high taxation, but on the one hand, on the other hand, a policy of very low migration. They don't want immigrants in there. And so this grew from 2000. Did you feel yourself in alliance with any of that? And do you feel that there's been a kind of changing of the political ground as a consequence of recent elections on the continent, and indeed Donald Trump in America?
Well, my social democracy is rooted in Europe. I mean, I believe in Helmut Schmidt.
Yeah.
And I thought he was a very good man and a serious man. And he converted a party that was basically unsound on defense to be sound on defense. So I've got a lot of time for Helmut Schmidt. And I wrote probably the most serious piece on social democracy I've ever written for a book on Helmut Schmidt.
Yes, right.
So, you know, I really admired the man, and what did he call me once? Finkel, pain in the arse, really, in German. But I was dealing with his liberal foreign policy minister, who didn't want to make any movement at all on disarmament, and I was desperate to try and take down the numbers of fighting forces in Europe, and all the time trying to take initiatives to reduce defense and to find ways of I've been taking a passionate interest in nuclear disarmament and by negotiation. And a lot of these areas, I would look to Germany for assistance and help. Not much social democracy in France at that time, but my closest political friend was Michel Rocard.
Yeah.
Which, considering how bad my French is, thank God he spoke bloody good English.
The kind of sea change which has happened in the last 20 years, probably coming to a culmination with the election of Trump. And there are many, it seems an odd thing to say, you can see that there is a left-wing side to Trump as well as a right-wing side to Trump, which we see with tariffs, for example, the protection of jobs in areas such as Detroit, Dearborn, Akron, Flint. This was a new wave of belief, primarily in the nation state. And it's obviously partly a reaction against globalization. But the belief in the nation state, a kind of belief in faith and family as well, going back to those core ideas of social democracy. Do you feel yourself at least in train with that school of thought?
Yes, I am a strong believer that the decisiveness of the nation state is an essential element of democracy and coherence and courage. So I would never want to diminish the proper positioning of the nation state. And I say positioning because now we live in a world, and have lived in a world for a very long time really, that you can't do things on your own. You have to cooperate with other countries. And that degree of cooperation can also be a method of taking your socialist values out into poor countries, getting rid of undemocratic leaders. After all, I spent a hell of a long time trying to get democracy in Africa when I was Foreign Secretary.
I think Uganda was quite high on the agenda at that point, wasn't it? It seems to me, I don't know if you've been watching, I know you mentioned to me earlier, and indeed during a previous discussion was that you're not remotely interested in British politics, which I quite liked, given that I'm interviewing you on British politics in front of 300 people. But it seems to me, if you look at the Labour Party, and the difference between what happened when the Labour Party was elected on July the 4th last year, and its apparent volte-face on a whole host of issues since the advent of Trump in America. And that's partly defence, and it's partly benefits, and it's partly whether we should have arts festivals sponsored by BP and the like. But they've changed.
And the fact that the British public is still aghast that they thought they could have their clothes bought by rich people.
Yeah, well, I
promise you, that comes up time after time, that they could actually go out and be clothed by rich sponsors, and some of them not even really closely linked to the Labour Party. No, the electorate is, I tell you, I think the thing the electorate don't like above all else is frauds. And if they sniff it out, they tend to hold on to it. They don't give it up. They look for it, and of course we're none of us perfect, so it's quite easy to find it.
Which is why Boris Johnson collapsed so quickly, I suspect.
That's a difficult one to sum up in a word. Boris, why did he walk out, having won the issue? And he suddenly said he couldn't face it, and passed on to the lady.
But the answer, I think, would be that the Conservative Party, particularly in Parliament, never really liked Boris Johnson, but put up with him because he could win elections. And as soon as it was seen that he couldn't win an election, as a consequence of Partygate and all that flim-flammery during COVID, they thought, right, the rug is pulled from under your foot, we'll get someone else. And they chose.
He won the referendum on Europe. He had developed a very good policy for helping the poorer regions in this country.
Yeah.
He could have been really quite a redistributive Prime Minister.
Do you think that was in his heart?
Boris is a very difficult person to understand. I don't pretend to know him very well, and I can't say I admire him. He's just too... grotesque. He's very tough.
Well, I worked with him for a long time.
He was a very good mayor of London.
He was a very good mayor of London. He was also a kind of good editor of The Spectator, by which he did no work whatsoever, but the commission thing. I should do that.
Wasn't he editor when nobody would use the word devaluation?
Yes.
And he did let devaluation be used as a subject.
But he also, I also remember him saying to me, after he'd given his word of honour to Andrew Neil, his managing editor, that I don't want to stand for Parliament, don't be ludicrous. He wrote, Rod, shall I stand for Henry old Thames? What do you think? And I just couldn't see, there was a lack of honesty there, much as he's incredibly personable and good company and well read, all these nice middle class things which we like, but it's when you said the word fraud, that was the name which, I don't know why, sprung into my mind, Boris Johnson.
Well, Cummings got him in the end, didn't he?
Yeah.
There we are.
He's back. He's back. Who would you vote for tomorrow? I know you will be able to vote, won't you?
Yes, I'm out of the House of Lords completely and absolutely.
Does that mean you renounce your lordshipness?
Yes, I've renounced my lordshipness, and I can vote at the next election if I'm still here. Not by any means sure, but no, it's corrupt. The House of Lords is so corrupt that there is only one way. You've got to start from scratch. Can't go back. There's a very good case for a revising chamber, but it's not for ambitious politicians. I mean, the House of Lords at one stage had very few MPs. Now it's a meal ticket. You go off and you're paid. You go in there and you have all these contacts. Now we see all these allegations about famous generals and other things. No. But I tell you, it's corrupt.
And what way would you vote tomorrow, do you suppose? Is there something?
Well, you have to choose your MP. And I have the most dreadful MP in Tower Hamlets, so I could never vote for her.
You live in Tower Hamlets?
We live in Tower Hamlets.
Oh, right, yeah.
I've lived in Limehouse.
Assume you were in Plymouth, Devonport.
Well, there's a very good young Labour guy in Plymouth who's a Minister of Defence. One of the ministers. I once gave him some money.
Well,
Of course, Plymouth is my base.
yes.
They've always supported me.
Yes.
I'm a proud
You're a Devonian.
I'm a Devonian, and we have no liberals in
Which is vital.
right. they're all around us in the West Country. People always thought, well, surely why don't we be interested in the Liberals? Well, I can tell you why. At least this is a good psychological story. Not true, but when I fought Torrington, North Devon for Labour, when my little pile reached the point that I'd saved my deposit, the Tories cheered and the Liberals booed. And some people say the iron entered my soul about Liberals.
Yeah,
they're not serious. That's why I don't take the Liberal Party seriously. They're never going to be iron in my lifetime.
Are we serious?
Are we?
Social Democratic Party?
If we're not, then we're not social democrats. One of our problems is we're a bit boringly serious, and that is part of our philosophy, and we can't change it in a way. I think we are a bit boring, but you know, social democracy has been around a very long time, and it's often people say it's going, but it stays or it comes back quickly. It has
That's adaptability.
It's adaptability, but I think it has an inner honesty. It's trying to get at the real problems. It's trying to analyze what are the real difficulties and do something about it. And one thing the SDP certainly did is it brought women into British politics. In the old days when my wife would come to the Labour Party conferences, and you'd see practically no women at all. And it transformed. Women played active roles. There were many of them were candidates, very effective people coming into politics for the first time. We were screwed by the voting system.
Yeah, and still are.
And still are, and it is still the biggest issue in British politics. And unless they do anything about it, the conventional party is going to be wiped out at the next election. And what comes in will go for proportional representation.
Does reform worry you, or do you see things in it which you understand why the public goes for?
It may be a necessary step towards proportional representation and towards doing something serious about immigration. And nobody can or should govern this country that is not listening to the people who are telling them day after day, do something about this. They're not going to come up with solutions. It's a very, very difficult problem to come up with. But we haven't got a political party at the moment who's dealing with it at all. They're afraid of it. It's sheer gutlessness. It has got to be grappled with. You cannot carry on. You can't go to some towns and cities in this country without feeling alienated.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about it because people are afraid of being thought to be racist.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I was slightly surprised to hear you say, but you're absolutely right. Reform does say that. So does the SDP to a point. But reform does say that. Are there things about reform which attract you?
Nothing really. Can't say. I don't want them to succeed, but I would have thought it's quite likely they'll form a big enough element to change the government of the country.
Yeah.
Probably not in a very good way. So wake up now.
Yeah.
So here we have a Labour government, in many ways a good government. And it seems possible for it to grapple with really dealing with the problem of immigration.
That might come, given the Labour government which was elected July the 4th, now seems a completely different beast. And it's changed its views on, I mean, Lord Glasman will, I dare say, explain more of this in time, but changed completely. Perhaps Yvette Cooper may do more than simply paddle around in the channel going angrily and mindless, but actually do something about it. I do get that suspicion that it is a government which no longer wishes to tilt at windmills, but wishes to actually achieve and accomplish something. Or maybe I'm just being overly optimistic.
I think Starmer's a serious person. A lawyer's not often the best training for Democratic politician. But I think that he's got good people around him, and it has certainly not fulfilled its potential. And let's hope it does. It's in all our interests that it does. It's going to stay there for a serious length of time. And if it does well, it is possible that it will stop this Farage-type party that's brewing up on...
I can't see much in common between you and Nigel Farage, I have to say.
Well, I don't think there's any
There is nothing Farage always there. Then I think we should probably take some questions from you ladies and gentlemen now. I think...
Who would like to ask Lord Owen a question? Go ahead.
Very interesting talk, Lord Owen and Rod. I've got a question about your opinion on two aspects of Keir Starmer's foreign policy, if you like. One, do you think it's good value and sensible to give away the Chagos Islands and pay 52 billion over decades for the privilege? And secondly, his increasing commitment to send troops, British troops, into Ukraine as well. He's now said that's gone into operational stage, so operational planning.
Okay, so 2 points. First, the Chagos Islands is a kind of disastrous policy. And secondly, what about British troops going to Ukraine?
Well, as far as Chagos Islands, the real problem for us is the military base is miles away from these islands. I can't understand why anybody should have possibly stirred the pot. Why on earth they do it? And then you look at the reason and you see government ministers and other people in their previous lives were commercially involved with this issue. And I can't understand under any circumstances to touch it. You knew it was sensitive. You knew you wanted that military base up near India, where it was very crucial. And the Indians wanted us to keep it. And of course, the Americans is the main person there. But it's our base, but it's also American base. How on earth that was done, I cannot understand. Completely ludicrous to raise that issue. Now, eventually the Americans didn't want it. Now they've said they do. I mean, it's just fait accompli, just covering base. But I don't know why. And some very sensible ex-Labour people got involved in the negotiations, but also people who were involved who had commercial interests in it. Not a happy story, I might say. Maybe we haven't heard the end of it all. So that's one thing. Sorry, the other one was
Ukraine troops.
I don't think the Russians will ever accept a NATO country having troops in Ukraine. There's some odd little bits of gestures going on at the moment, but I think they're pure gestures. I don't think Russia wants to influence Ukraine, if not take it over. It's tried attacking them, it's failed, but it will take presumably some gains from if they do have negotiation. And we must all want the war to end. It's terrible, really, casualty. And in this little small sense, I think the President of the United States actually does feel this. I think there is a motivation behind him on just seeing casualties. He doesn't like it. I think he's never liked that sort of thing. But it's a mess. The whole thing is a mess. And the relationship with America are a mess. And I think we've got to learn the lesson. We can go on calling it NATO and hope they don't have anything to do with it. If they do come in, they'll screw up NATO, the Americans. We'll have to fight build a defensive alliance in Europe with Canada, ourselves, and have as little to do with America as possible. Because there are deep-seated people there in America, likely to remain in American policy, that just simply want to screw it up. So to keep them out. I know this is a heresy. We need the Americans. We need decent, sensible Americans, not this megalomaniac group that we've got there now at the moment. We shouldn't also be afraid of calling them out. Why on earth? I mean, surely there's somebody in the British government who will say publicly that their behaviour to Canada is a serious assault on every democratic principle this country stands for. I haven't read a single speech from anybody of importance that hasn't said that what they're doing to Canada is utterly disgraceful. Utterly disgraceful. And I think we've been disappointment to the Canadians that we haven't spoken out. We've elevated a new philosophy in politics that you don't actually say what you think ever. You flannel your way through. You have this sort of diplomats. I tell you, the diplomats are often braver than the politicians. I don't think we have foreign policy in many parts of the country, of the world. And I think it's a great shame. And I think our voice ought to be heard, and it ought to be calling out a lot of the behaviour of America.
Thank you. The woman in the shirt, a microphone here.
Thank you. You were talking about the problems with immigration and nobody actually facing the issues of getting on with it because they're frightened of being corporations and so on. But I think now more and more people do realise there's a huge immigration problem. Are there some sort of huge technical problems that are not being voiced, properly voiced, and why they can't deal with it? Why the issue can't be dealt with? What are the technical issues? And also, I'm also interested in why you say the House of Lords is corrupt, apart from the people going in, the number of people going in, where they come from. Are the processes corrupt or in the...
So your main point is, why is the House of Lords corrupt?
Well, actually,
I didn't quite catch the first part of your question.
The immigration problem. What are the real fundamental technical problems?
Yeah.
We're not being able to control immigration.
Fair enough. One of the technical problems of controlling immigration, you said it was a very, very difficult issue. What would you do if you were Home Secretary now?
Well, I think you'd have to look at the European Convention on Human Rights. I don't think it's necessary to abandon it, but I think it is necessary to point out how you think it should be interpreted and has been interpreted in the past in the British system. And I think that if you once dealt with that, one of the most serious arguments which is constantly used why somebody who wants to come into this country, whether it's a boat person or somebody who's coming illegally. Remember, we accept a lot of people, and rightly so, into this country as legal immigrants who go through procedures in consulates all over the world and take their time and put on a list and wait patiently. Allowing all this illegal immigration to come in damages that number of people we take in. We're actually we're combining to help them cheat the system. So there's a lot that needs to be done, and it requires courage. And you tell civil servants what to do. Ministers are there to tell them what to do. And if they're not doing it, removing them. There's something wrong with the actual bureaucracy of immigration. And we've got to clean it up. How many people go down there and watch what's happening? A minister go down there and wait and sit there and listen to what is happening. It surely must be obvious what's happening. And I think that this is again strangely not serious government. I mean, we have seen serious government just recently, and very interestingly, in the Minister of Health. I've got a lot of hope for him. He's a young man. He'd taken his time a little bit. He saw what it was wrong, this bloody great bureaucracy that Lansley landed us with, and this NHS England and all this sort of stuff. I mean, I attacked those day after day. I've written books about the health service reforms of Lansley and everything like that. I made no impact, this chap. That's right, Minister of Health. Within 3 to 4 weeks, he's solved the problem. Good on him. Excellent.
Any more questions?
The House of Lords question. The House of Lords question.
Oh yeah, why is the House of Lords corrupt?
Well, it's too easy. You know, you go in there and you can promise people, get up and make a speech about something, as long as it's not too obvious, and you get rewarded. And you can see the linkages that are established. The House of Lords ought to be a revising chamber. And the more legislation that we pass, and we become a legislative factory, it turns under all governments, and it's been growing and growing and growing. The people who do a really splendid job are the retired lawyers, and particularly judges, who can spot the wording that is unclear, that is, has got 2 or 3 interpretations, and they put in words and correct the wording, and greatly improve the legal system when it comes to an actual law court. So that is a very helpful revising chamber function, to get exactly right words so that in a legal case the judge knows the parameters and the jury can understand what's happening. So I think that there's a very good case for a revising chamber, but it could be 100, maybe 200 at the very most. What?
Elected?
No. I think I would, a combination of what it is now. It's a secondary chamber, it's not a primary chamber. I think getting the right people is more important. If you want to have an elected element, maybe, but it shouldn't have too much power. It's absurd to think of it. You've got a primary chamber and then a revising chamber. And they're different animals. So you don't, one obviously has to be democratic. The other one, I don't.
Okay, I had a couple of hands over here. Yes, yourself. Woman.
Thank you very much, Lord Owen. I just have a question about what happened in the Thatcherite period, the privatization. And at that time, it was like a good solution to the problems of inefficiency. But now we've seen companies like Thames Water and the National Railway. Thames Water is practically bankrupt, and National Railway, the fares are so expensive. So they were nationalized before and it didn't work, and now they were privatized, it was even worse. So what's the solution to this?
So to what degree has privatization been unhelpful to the economy, to the country, to the people who use the services, and is there a future renationalisation, I suppose?
Well, take the worst privatisation there's ever been, which is water. We never had problems with water before. We've sold it off, sold it at such a high price that they couldn't carry out their functions, and we ought to renationalise it tomorrow. There's absolutely no case for it whatsoever. But there are a few other things that I could say, but I mean that's one in which I think nationalisation is utterly ridiculous. And I think there are quite a few others. But I don't mind taking power from the state if it's a function which the state and the state alone can judge, you know. And I think that there are, I mean, sometimes I think the railways could go back. They've improved a bit. I don't travel, frankly, very much on the railways, so I don't propound to be a great expert on it. If I can avoid travelling by train, I do.
Okay, I've got a few more questions.
I haven't improved that much, believe it. Sorry, where are we?
Good evening. You mentioned earlier that there were some issues with the ECHR. As an alternative to that, could you see any benefits in a Robert Jemerick-style British Bill of Rights?
largely about the ECHR, but also any benefits that there being, as Representative has kind of suggested, a British Bill of Rights.
Well, I've been in favour of human rights all my life. I wrote a book about it when I was Foreign Secretary. So I am in favour of rights, and I'm in favour of a predisposition to try and establish, as part of democratic government, human rights. But I think we've got to be a little careful with it. I'm very suspicious of lawyers, and always have been. And I think that they are given too great a place in British politics. Too many of them in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords. And I think that we've got to be very careful about the role of lawyers. You have to be pretty careful about doctors too, I might add. So, I really think human rights is an important element worldwide, and I think we can do more about that in Britain, and more to encourage a system of human rights in quite a lot of Commonwealth countries, actually. I think the Commonwealth, incidentally, ought to be a more demanding organisation, or back it in.
I have time for two more questions. I'm going to take this gentleman here. There's a microphone coming to you.
All right, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Owen. So I do believe that there's no perfect solution to every problem in the country, but it's very crucial to identify and define the problem. And I'll try to adhere to a big topic here, is what is wrong in Britain. And during my trip from England to Scotland, it's very easy for me to hear people in the pub saying that, the politician is always failing us. And even they're all elected, to my knowledge, they're all elected, but they're still failing the people. And then I would say, is there some people saying that democracy is not really working anymore? The kind of
democracy is what, sorry?
It's not working anymore? Or this kind of representative democracy is not the best kind of democracy? And I even hear some people saying that maybe we should go to some form like the People's Assembly, that you randomly draw the citizens to form the assembly and try to formulate a solution to some problem. And then that's my question. Yeah, from your experience, is that really something we need to change in the system?
This is a sort of suspicion that democracy, that the people believe that democracy itself isn't working. In some way it's broken down.
I think there is a disillusionment with the word democracy. I think too many faults are seen in democracy. But to give it up, you have to produce a better system. And Churchill's famous phrase, you can think of all the different systems of the world. You come back to, usually, and I personally feel that it's the best we've got. Now, how to improve it, that is, there are different types of democracy, and I think that we could look at those. I mean, there are people who use a lot more referendums than others. Is a referendum a good tool of democracy? I think it is. And I think that there are other mechanisms that for a democracy can radiate out a little. On the other hand, you need firm government, and therefore the concept that you have a period of time between elections during which governing can go on its merits, provided you get it through the House of Commons, the House of Lords, is not a bad one, I don't think. I don't quite know. The alternation of power. That seems to me an element that if you lose that in a democracy, and one party goes on and on having power, then you fail. So alternation of power is important. Every now and then we see examples. I mean, I think there was a time when Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore was conducting himself in a way that was good and sensible and helpful to Singapore. But he stayed too long. And that's one of the other things. If you want to have a modification of democracy, limit their terms. So I can understand a situation where a country gets into a very bad state and it needs more power. And I think you can, during that period of time, take more authoritarianism than might be acceptable. But you've got to be very sure that it doesn't just go on. And so taking a more authoritarian power for a year, 2 years, might be acceptable in some ways. I don't think I think China may be experimenting with some quite interesting methods, not being what we would call democracy, but having more capacity to listen. Who knows? It hasn't got it at the moment.
Okay, very good. So we'll have a panel now, shortly, who are going to discuss some of the themes raised here. So just for time reasons, we're going to have to draw this discussion to a close. So I'm going to take 2 questions, with apologies to this side of the room, from this gentleman here and the woman back there. So just, if you can be quick with your questions, that would be great. Do you have a microphone?
My question will be in relation to the United Nations. As a former Foreign Secretary yourselves, obviously you were involved with many countries around the world, including Bosnia during the war. Now, what's the point of having Security Council of which decisions are not implemented? And the Organization of United Nations, like International Criminal Court and International Criminal Justice Court, if their decisions are not implemented, what is the point of having them? For example, there is an arrest warrant against Putin, there is an arrest warrant against Netanyahu and others. Why Netanyahu is not being arrested? And why Putin is not being arrested? Yes, I understand Putin is not traveling as much as Netanyahu is traveling. If the big nations like United States doesn't recognize the international law, why do we have them then?
Okay.
And just at the back, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. So apologies to all those who want questions. The one who just there, and we'll take the 2 questions. It'll be a quick question.
Yes.
Very short time.
Given the aftermath of Brexit, what should be an economic strategy that Britain should look for in terms of securing global ties that, assuming not reversing Brexit, what should be the ideal way to look at trade ties in terms of global geopolitics that's going on right now?
The flaw with this meeting is that there are 2 people up here who are deaf. So I need to ask 3.
Could you just, so your question is about the global economy and what Britain's approach should be to trade and tariffs and that kind of question? Is that?
I will repeat. I tried to be loud. Basically, if Britain were to not reverse Brexit, how do they navigate securing similar trade deals that match the benefits of a membership of EU? How do they look for creating ties with other countries? Is there a strategy?
Well, let's start with the first one. If the gentleman there who, if I can look upon as most generously, suggesting we abolish the UN, which I would agree with immediately, but I don't think that was the gist of your argument. I think it was the reverse. So, should we, what is the point of the UN Security Council, and UN arrest warrants if we take no notice of them? We don't arrest Putin, because I would suggest we can't. and we don't respect Netanyahu for the perceived crimes that the UN member states continually assert against Israel.
But Netanyahu has been found guilty in a criminal court. And if he travels, he could be arrested. We won't be arrested in this country because it's an embarrassment. Although we support the concept of a criminal court, but the indictment of Netanyahu for his conduct over Gaza, in my view, carries conviction to many people in Israel as well as in the rest of the world. So personally, I think it's a shame. Of course, even if you utilize those procedures, he would simply not travel to countries which this would be done. So that's one of the ways they can get around it. But I think it is a good thing that, I can't remember the name of him, he's an English lawyer who is the chairman of the criminal court, and he has definitely found Netanyahu guilty. So Netanyahu might make a mistake and land in a country that does accept the rulings of the criminal court, in which case he could be arrested. And I think it's a salutary thing for him. There are countries where he can't travel.
And the other question was on trade tariffs, the legitimacy of them, or the necessity for them. How do you see it?
Well, if there is a legitimacy for it, it doesn't stem from the mouth of President Trump. That would be utterly sure. He's always traditionally like them, and there's a simplicity in them, you know, and they will exist. I believe in free and open trade as far as it's humanly possible to do, and I think that therefore I'm not in favour of them. I think they usually turn out to be expensive as well for the average Joe. So I think they're not conducive to good international relations and good relations within a country. So I'm not in favour.
Thank you. Well, David Owen, formerly Lord Owen, thank you so much. Thanks for all your questions. If you could show some agreement.
Thank you to Rod for interviewing Lord Owen. So now we have a panel of distinguished social democrats to take the stage for you. They're each going to talk for 5 minutes, and then the floor will be open for you to quiz them on whether social democracy fix it. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramsey, and thank you very much to the audience. It's been a long day. Thank you for being here with us. And just as we hit the halfway point before we start with the panel, I must acknowledge, I think it's a perfect time to acknowledge my dear co-founders, Sanjay and Christian, who have worked together with me every day for the past 3 months, from registering the society to organizing this event. And I cannot thank you enough. I hope you're listening. Alongside dear colleagues Evan, Suresh, Arjun, Matthew, Owen, John, and Christopher, who are doing a fantastic job tonight to ensure this event runs smoothly. And I could not have a better team than you guys. Thank you very much. I also wish to sincerely thank Professor Hugo de Berg and Professor Peter Ramsey, whose close mentorship is vital. And they have stood with us in solidarity from the making of this idea to the fruition of tonight's event. They've stood with us in the lows and in the highs. We're sincerely grateful. Thank you very much. And now let me briefly introduce the panel for tonight. First up, we have, from the right, Lord Glasman, who's the Labour life peer at the House of Lords, founder of the Blue Labour. Lord Glasman joined the Labour Party in the 1970s and is known for coining the term Blue Labour as an opposition to the New Labour. Lord Glasman was also the only figure from the Labour Party to be invited to the second inauguration of Donald Trump in January 2025. He was a part of an invitation list which excluded Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the UK's ambassador to America, Peter Mandelson. And speaking on a Times Radio interview, Lord Glasman has said that among America's working class communities, as they prepare for Mr. Trump to become president again, quote, there's a huge energy and a sense of almost restoration. You know they want to make America great again. And we look forward to hearing what he has to say on Britain's society, economy, and the working class. To his right, we have Ms. Hilary Salt. To his left, we have Ms. Hilary Salt, the deputy leader of the Social Democratic Party. As a leading finance professional and scheme actuary, Ms. Hilary Salt has a central role to play in the development of the SDP's distinctive economic policies, and we would love to hear what she has to say on this. And further to the left, we have Mr. Craig Houston, who's the chairman of the Social Democratic Party of Scotland, travelling all the way from Scotland. Welcome. And last but not least, on the very far left, we have not far left, but Professor Hugo de Berg, who's an expert in the field of media studies and the studies of China. He's a certified foreign expert by the Chinese State Administration of Foreign Expert, Walt Disney Chair in Global Media and Communications at the Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University. He's an honorary fellow at the 48 Group Club, a board member at the Great Britain China Centre. He founded the China Media Centre at the University of Westminster. His research has focused on the social function of journalism as a reflection of culture. As he stated, it is often said that journalism is the first rough draft of history. By contrast, investigative journalism provides the first rough draft of the legislation. And finally, I would like to acknowledge our academic chair for tonight, Dr. Peter Ramsey, a representative from the LSE. Professor Ramsey joined the LSE in 2006, and as a legal scholar, his research focuses on political jurisprudence, national sovereignty, and democratic theory, contributing to what is known as the political turn in criminal law theory. Professor Ramsey is currently working on two related projects: a theory of the criminal law as the branch of public law on which the state takes its political authority, and the idea of the vulnerable citizen. We couldn't have a better academic chair than you. Thank you. And welcome.
Will be first,
okay, so good evening everybody. Really good to be, obviously the LSE is a hostile institution in lots of ways, founded by the Fabians, famous for their support for eugenics, the Soviet Union, and all those things, so I just have to put in a dissenting voice. But nonetheless, very good to be here. Just to say, Harry, if studied Khan says it, it's probably not true. So, I think people are a bit happier than you think. But today's been very helpful, David, in clarifying certain things. So, for start speaking for Blue Labour, I've always viewed the SDP as family. When I read your founding document, I had a hallucinogenic experience. I thought I'd written it myself, and I couldn't remember it. It must be the liberal drug regime of the 1970s or something. But it's very good, and I really appreciate it. And also, obviously, to David, I've said to you how many times in the Lords when we met, we really must have a cup of tea. But I just want to say publicly how important you've been for us, particularly. I recently got into trouble. I called the Attorney General an arrogant progressive fool. People in my party didn't take it so well, but the important thing was the next part of the sentence, which was they believe not in the rule of law, but in the rule of lawyers. Peter, we've got to resist that, and I also agree on the absolute subordination of doctors to democratically elected politicians. We've got to find a space for politics, and I think that's very important. But David, I think tonight you've clarified for me certain areas of difference I'd like to just talk about, which is sort of related to my criticisms of the Fabians and LSE. There's a certain desiccated rationalism in social democracy. Blue Labour is much more open to faith, to the monarchy, for example, is a very important institution. So, but I think absolutely we share the idea of sovereignty, the absolute necessity of sovereignty, of democratic sovereignty, and the subordination of the civil service and experts to decision, to action. So, and I think that at this moment our country is at a real turning point. I wish to welcome Marinovska from Ukraine, and I hope that we can all show solidarity with Ukraine and the absolute necessity to honour its obligations there. You mentioned, Harry, about Trump. Well, I do think that it's a very, very significant move. I think America is moving. I see Trump as comparable to Julius Caesar or Napoleon. Oh, by the way, David, we need to discuss this. Blue Labour takes a very hostile view of Napoleon. What's your take on Napoleon? Just interested. What's your take on Napoleon? Okay, we'll have that conversation later, but I think it's important because Napoleon is held in quite high regard by European social democrats, and I would absolutely dissent from that view. I think he was a sort of legalistic, murdering tyrant kind of figure who needed to be fought, as was obviously Hitler in the same kind of content. So Blue Labour we are now living through for the first time the consequences of Brexit, of the rediscovery of our national sovereignty, of our obligations within Europe to be a leading force in defending Europe from this progressive illness, this palsy. So this is the big area of opposition to progressivism. You know, I always say it's the last thing you want to hear when you go to the doctor. It's progressive. and yet, we still think of it as something good, but it's not something good. It's something that stops decision, that is anti-democratic, that is legalistic, that is very Fabian. And I just want to clarify that this Fabianism is a very destructive and unpleasant force within politics. Blue Labour trusts completely our working class. So we worked together, Peter, on Brexit. The working class workforce that voted for that, their interests have been completely neglected over the last 40 to 50 years, and that's what needs to be reasserted, really. So I just wanted to really honour David Owen. You've really understood the importance of defence during all this period where it's been diminished. You've asserted the importance of national sovereignty and ministerial responsibility. The one huge area of difference, I would say, and I know we're not going to sort it out now, is that I oppose proportional representation utterly. I love the connection to place. I love the fact that MPs have to go back to their constituencies and listen to the fury. I've got 1 minute, so let's just think about how to deal with that. But above all, I would say to the SDP that we are always open to working together, to building a politics of the common good, a democratic politics of the common good. I've outlined a few areas where we wouldn't describe ourselves as social democrats, and that's because of traditional social democrat hostility to faith, to tradition, but also an excessive faith in the sorts of people who founded the LSE, which probably is not the right way to go. Thank you.
I'm standing because I've sat quite a long journey down here and I've sat in coffee shops all day, so please forgive me for wanting to exercise. And I want to talk about 5 things. Hopefully I can prove a point to you that I am the least experienced person in this room with regards to politics. That should be quite easy for me. I want to prove to you that that may actually be an advantage, because of the way I think and view politics. I want to talk to you about my slogan for Scotland in the coming Holyrood elections, which is "Let Scotland Work," and what that actually means. I want to point out the one big problem that I see with social democracy, but the last thing I want to do is show you how to fix that. So the first thing I need to prove to you, which will take you 2 seconds and very easy, is to prove that I am not the brightest in the room about politics. Because my moment where I get involved in politics was the 23rd of November 2023, when I decided that the SNP were not very good at governing. And I decided to do something about it. And I decided that I would stand for election. I didn't know who under, maybe as an independent, but I would look into politics and see where I stood. And at that point, I firmly believed I was right of centre. And that was wrong, and it was stupid. And let me just, if you don't mind, help me here, prove a simple point. I hate right and left. I do not understand the difference. I thought I did, and I was wrong. And I want to prove to you, or help you prove to me. So could we do a quick head count? If you think having a National Health Service is important, could you please raise your hand? Right? So now, using the politics of today, what we've established, because we have to use left and right, and we have to use extremes, we've just found out that you all want a nation where the state supports you and takes your responsibility away. So we're now in a room full of communists, according to the politics of today. Let me ask you one other question. Raise your hand if you believe that immigration and illegal immigration and fake asylum seeking is too high just now. Could you raise a hand? So the same room of people we've just figured out are all racist fascists. And that's what politics is doing just now. We are polarising people, and we're making them polar by using words like right and left. And I became a social democrat because I can actually see the difference between right and wrong. And that makes sense to me. Right and left doesn't. So when we come up to Holyrood, I've come up with a slogan for my campaign, and our campaign, because hopefully I will not be in Holyrood alone as the only SDP, MSP, and that is "Let Scotland Work." Because there's too many things in Scotland does not work, and social democracy can actually fix them. Let me tell you some horrific things about my part of the UK. 2 things I cherish is the United Kingdom, and Scotland's part of that. But 20% of the people that leave education never contribute in PAYE or national insurance. That is Scotland. 22% of the people who do contribute national insurance and PAYE work in the public sector. So the reliance on people going out and creating wealth and creating money and putting even more in is completely broke, and we need to help fix that. The politics in Scotland is broke. We are polarised. We make people decide. I'm very easy for me to say I'm a unionist. So when the referendum came, it was an easy one for me. And there was other people on the other side. But there's a big chunk in the middle. That on that day, we made them decide whether they're a unionist like me or a separatist like the SNP. But the big chunk in the middle was ignored. But we made them put themselves in a box. And I believe that is wrong. And we need to work for everybody in Scotland. And I believe SDP can do that. But the last thing I want to do, I want to own up to the biggest problem with social democracy in the United Kingdom and making the difference that it should. We can do 2 things that a lot of people do, and they believe it will work. And use an example, if I can come up with a solution to the problem, this lecture will have 3 knocks. Problem solved. So let's just consider the single biggest issue you have as a citizen of the UK with the UK. And you can see what in social democracy could fix that problem. We can have all the will in the world and think, yeah, let's do it, social democracy can work, and think willpower and willpower alone will sort it. Well, we've not got any 3 knocks in that lecture by simply thinking. The other thing that we do today in great numbers, we take to social media And we think by telling everybody else that you have the answer to the problems and they should follow you, that will somehow fix the world's ills. And that lectern is still no knocking. The only way we can sort the problems in the United Kingdom and in my part of that, Scotland, is actually getting up and knocking the lectern. That means to solve these problems, excuse my language, we need to get up off our arse and do something about it. Thank you very much.
Great, Professor Owen.
Yes. A few years ago, I had the job of taking a lot of senior Chinese officials, vice ministers, heads of government departments and so on, around Britain and introducing them to British governance and politics, current affairs and so on. And Lord Glasman may remember, because he helped me, he took some around the House of Parliament, which was great. And I remember that at one point corruption was a big issue in China and was being reported everywhere. And one of the officials said to me, he said, excuse me, Mr. David, is there any corruption in British politics? And I said, well, we don't have much of this financial corruption, but we do have a lot of political corruption, in that our politicians get into power and the first thing they do is they pass laws and push money towards people who they think are going to vote for them in the next election. And then the prime ministers, they come in and they immediately forget all the problems that Britain has, and they go out on the international stage and they start mixing with prime ministers and presidents and telling them that Britain will save the world in some manner or other. What we have wrong, what is wrong with Britain is not only the politicians, but is the fact that the parties became vehicles for individual ambitions with no better strategy than winning by appealing to noisy minorities. For the Tories, it was hedge fund managers and private equity, and now for Labour, the only beneficiaries of current policies are the public sector and NGOs, big corporates, ideologists and the teaching and admin professions. What we need, it seems to me, is a party with the kind of moral vision that both Morris and David Owen have described. A party with a moral vision of how we can restore the economy and therefore the hopes of the 9 million economically inactive people in this country, of how we can play our part in the world's existential issues, from climate change to weapons of mass destruction. And why? Why do we need this party? Well, not only for those reasons, but because the UK itself is in crisis. Our economy is faltering. Inequality between rich and poor is extreme. We've not developed the deindustrialized north of the Midlands. We can't afford the massive costs of health, welfare and mass immigration. We are immensely in debt. We're dependent upon other countries for energy and defense. Half of our economy is owned by the USA because we've allowed greedy businessmen to flog our great industries and our startups. The governing parties, and all that was talked about by Harry Chalk at the beginning as well, the governing parties have only two solutions: higher taxes or bigger cuts. And they double down on their ideological projects to please lobbyists and campaigning minorities. We get DEI. What's that? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which basically means taking away jobs from Brits and giving them to newcomers. Our, the SDP's DEI is development, education, innovation. Building what we need. What we need is a government credibly focused on economic development and the rebuilding of the wrecked economies of the North, the Midlands, the seaside resorts, and the fishing towns. What we need is a government which puts education, enterprise, and innovation first, because these are the foundations of democracy, welfare, and human happiness. It is social democracy, I argue, that ensures that individual and independent enterprise is encouraged, and that it serves the interests of all the people. Social democracy puts first the economic well-being of all, their security and their stability in their own country. We need a vision for the future. We must rejuvenate at home so that we can walk tall abroad and be listened to on climate change, environmental degradation, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and population displacement, which is the word I prefer to use rather than immigration. A Britain revitalized with a strong economy now and a hope for future generations.
a social democratic vision, which at the moment only the Social Democratic Party can offer. Thank you.
We have the deputy leader of the Social Democratic Party here.
Thank you very much. Feels a bit like a balloon debate, this, where we're all pitching our own ideas about why social democracy works. And I want to talk about the social partnership element of social democracy, in particular in the workplace. So, from my point of view, today's politicians seem to rarely engage constructively with either workers or their representatives. So for the Tories, the trade unions are the formal enemy, and actual workers, especially public service workers, are the blob, standing in the way of greater efficiency, refusing to go back to the office, demanding pay rises to maintain their standard of living, and never taking responsibility for everything. For the Labour left, I would say the trade unions are kind of the embarrassing godparents that you need to be kind to because you'll get that generous birthday present, but you don't really want to be seen with them otherwise. And they see workers as kind of powerless victims who kind of constantly need new rights bestowed upon them. Flexible working from day one, identity-based rights that can corrode workplace relationships, really bureaucratic requirements that often do not work in the workplace. So there has to be a better way than this. And if we think about it even for a moment, we know that workers are neither the enemy nor helpless. Because workers are you and me, your mums and dads, your neighbours, your friends. Now, are we doing the best work we can? Possibly not. But that's not because we're lazy or stupid or feckless. It's because we're constrained by badly designed regulations that lead to very poorly managed organisations. We're constrained by narrow profit margins due to rising costs. The work's still there, but the profit isn't, is a phrase you hear all the time. Energy costs are particularly an issue. And I'd say crucially we are, the problem is today's disenfranchised and alienated workers often don't know what their purpose is, they don't have any kind of belief or commitment to their organisation or to its role in the community or the nation. And the way to solve this is for workers to carve out more agency in the workplace, and I would call that social partnership. So what does social partnership mean? It means employers and workers acting together to improve the workplace. Now I know that sounds kind of naive and romantic and bleeding heart lefty, but it isn't. I would argue really strongly that whilst the interests of workers and shareholders are in conflict, it's always easier to resolve conflict if you have a bigger pie. And so improving productivity for everybody means there are some common interests here. So social partnership in the workplace, what does that look like? It means employers and workers investing in each other. An employer can invest in their workforce by training, developing them, providing decent benefits, and importantly, by investing in the business to improve productivity, to make those workers the most productive, and to create the ability to support higher pay. Workers in a workplace like that tend to stay with their employer, they develop loyalty and pride, and they partner with the employer in spotting and introducing improvements to practices and processes. Gary Smith from the GOB was saying the other day that nobody ever asks his energy workers what we should be doing about new energy production, and they are the people who really know. So how do we get to these sunny uplands? And I think there's the rub, because these changes cannot be willed by government or imposed top-down, whatever Elon Musk might think. They need to be won workplace by workplace, with employees realising they are capable of implementing change. And often that change will come as a result of friction in the workplace. So rather than having bureaucratic, unworkable rights bestowed by governments, consider a situation where workers tackle an issue with their employer and win a victory. They come out of that experience with pride in their achievements, a determination to stay with that employer to make sure they get the benefits of that new right, and a view that their situation is better than that of others. But that victory for the employees isn't a loss for the employer, because that employer now has a more committed workforce and it has a mechanism for negotiation. There's also a role for government, but that role for government is not as a battering ram or a bestower of rights. There are two suggestions I would make as to what government can do to improve social partnerships in the workplace. The first is to look at apprenticeships. So the current apprenticeship scheme, run by private sector training companies, is patchy, often poor quality. Trade accreditations are fragmented and colonised by private businesses offering worthless pieces of paper. Government needs to work with employers and the education sector to control this, perhaps by repurposing some of our universities back to good old technical colleges. And secondly, government needs to encourage and enable sectoral pay bargaining. Now, that doesn't mean that the government sets the levels in sectors. It means that they allow workers in those industries to negotiate with the employers, not just on pay, but on things like training and pathways to progress. Because if employers can't compete on pay, they're forced to compete on products, services and innovation. And so social democracy in the form of social partnership in the workplace could be a fantastic way to solve our productivity puzzle. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open it up to the floor in a second, but just as the chair, I'm permitted to ask a question myself under the LSE rules, and since the LSE's come up a couple of times in the discussion, I'll just throw it in. So, the current political situation is that a party called Reform is pushing towards a third of the vote, heading in the direction of a third of the vote. And that party is apparently very opposed, and one of its central themes will be immigration. On the other hand, we have a political class which is deeply committed to its history of global interconnection, and not just in the political parties in Parliament, but in all of its institutions. In the London School of Economics, for example, which used to have slogans on the walls, thinking without borders, the global university, and so on. And that runs through, and these are the institutions which have educated our current bureaucracy, our current professional classes, our current MPs, and so on. So in that situation, I just wonder, I've heard some nice ideas here, some good proposals, sensible maybe proposals about how we do things. But a right-wing commentator who I follow on social media the other day made the point, the SDP, yeah, social democracy, they're great. They're a Waitrose UKIP. Nice people, sensible suggestions, but really, what's about to hit the levels of state failure that are about to hit us? What's the offer beyond good, sensible, technical solutions? So that I'm just throwing that in. I'll go back to the audience. If you want to answer it, you can. I hear you, Craig. I'll take some questions from the audience first, and then you can answer them as you wish. So, is there any questions from the audience? Straight off.
Thanks. Mostly from Lord Glasman, really, is that it's interesting that you mentioned faith with social democracy. One colleague of ours, Alistair Mellon, makes the joke that the SDP currently is full of Catholics or ex-revolutionary communists. So it's an interesting marriage, really. And I was just kind of curious, Red Tory by Philip Blond is a big impact on my political views, as is your own work. How much did Catholic social teaching sort of come into it, and how much can that be applied to our current state to sort of help us get out?
I'll take one more question over here, and then I'll throw it back to the panel. I had some other people showing me hands. Go ahead.
I'm looking at the question that's been staring at me for about an hour and a half, which is what is wrong with Britain. And of course,
course, it's a complex question because there are too many things wrong with Britain. It's not easy to answer, but I would like to hear from members of the panel what they think is perhaps the top one or two issues, and what can social democracy do to fix it. That's what I'd love to hear, just that simplicity of that question that's staring me in the face.
Yeah, I couldn't even, yeah, so was that about Catholic social thought? Everything. I mean, Blue Labour is just application. So just, you know, paper encyclical was started about 1889 with Owen and Rod, then the great ones, everybody, is Centesimus Annus, and particularly Laborum Exergens on human work. By far the best philosophical treatment, Peter, of human work, far greater than any legal texts. Sorry, just saying, Catholic social thought is great. That's basically what I'm saying. And I just want to go through what it is, because obviously, so I grew up knowing about liberation theology and nothing about the others, so this is important. The first thing is the dignity of the human being, most particularly the dignity of the worker under capitalism. That's the greatest thing. Because what capitalism does is commodify God's creation. So it takes human beings in nature, which is creation, and says, let's have a price system. I spoke at ARC recently, I don't know where Graham is, and I said to them, how many of you believe in God? And they went, oh yeah, we believe in God. And I said, how many of you think that God made a design mistake and should have privatised it first? A bit more cognitive dissonance on that one. So the first thing is that there's things you can't compromise on, and one is the dignity of the human being, but particularly under capitalism, they want to turn a human being into a commodity. It's a desecration, it's disgusting, and has to be opposed. And the second one is about nature. You know, at least when you work with people of faith, unlike here, Peter, they don't believe the free market created the world. Okay, they think there was something before that. And David Owen said it, privatisation of water, what is that? What kind of insanity is that? The water should be subject to the price system. It's a condition of life. So that's the first thing, easy dignity of labour. The second is subsidiarity, which is an interesting, the power at the most local level commensurate with its function. And that's a huge, that links up with your point about what's wrong with Britain, is that people don't feel they've got any power, they think that life is something that just happens to them. There should be some, I'm into the parish commune, you know, very local units of accountability. And the third one is solidarity, you know, that we are responsible for each other's fate, that is an absolutely fundamental human responsibility. So there's a fourth point though, which I think you picked up on, which is that if you just allow technical considerations, you end up with an inhuman society. We should be humble in this world before God, because look at this beautiful creation that we're desecrating. And I think that that's a really important insight.
Can I ask you a question about immigration?
Sorry?
Immigration. Yeah. One thing that concerns me as a citizen is for 28 years we have selected for government at Westminster a party who's told us in their manifesto they will reduce immigration. So when I stand up in the street and say I think our immigration's a bit high, I'm a fascist racist, so much Labour and Tory be. But why have they not done it? Because that's where my head goes. If you're telling people who voted on manifestos for 28 years for both parties and nobody's done anything about it, then why is that? What's stopping us? And Lord Owen mentioned something that hit me right in the solar plexus. And that is the consideration that the House of Lords is corrupt. Because I have had a fear that that man has just confirmed. My fear is that I thought Britain was better than it really is. And I thought these things were other countries. But I've been considering for a long time, we have created an industry of immigration. And there's lots of millionaires and billionaires getting produced. We have people with hotels, we now have lawyers, we don't like lawyers, and they actually only advertise for EAC HR cases. I'm a podcaster. I touch this topic often. We had a case recently where an Albanian drugs lord was found with £250,000 in cash, went to court, was found guilty, and his lawyer got him to remain in the UK because his son likes the chicken nuggets here. This is where we are. So I'm thinking, why can we not stop this? Now I need to consider that my fear might actually be true because the man over there confirmed it tonight. And I fear that it goes deeper than the Lords. Is our Commons, are our MPs, are our civil servants as corrupt as that man knows our Lords are? Because that might be why none of them are brave enough to stop the gravy train, because too many people close to them are becoming millionaires and billionaires, and that actually scares me as a UK citizen.
Thanks. Anyone want to address what's wrong with Britain?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that Tony Blair thing and say a word 3 times. The word I'm going to say is productivity, productivity, productivity. That's what's wrong with Britain. And I think we've had stagnant productivity, not just since 2008, but I think you can trace this all the way back to the 1980s. And what we need to do is to reinvigorate industry. And there's a couple of things that I think are, are part of it. You asked the question, what's the offer? One is we need cheap energy. Cheap energy has to be nuclear. And we need to stop setting arbitrary targets around net zero that just outsource jobs to other countries rather than keeping them in the UK. So that's one way how we're going to fix it. Can I just say a quick word on what you mentioned on globalisation, because you're not going to stop globalisation, but I think it's not that's the problem. The problem is outsourcing power to global institutions. And we need to bring that power back. And you make a good point that actually a lot of the people who are now being trained to run the country have been absolutely brought up in a time when we didn't do any of this stuff. So we've forgotten how to do diplomacy. We've forgotten how to do trade deals, forgotten how to do all this. And we need to massively upskill our people to be able to do all that, because we can't just keep contracting it out to other people. Just a kind of tiny word on defence. A narrow concentration on defence spending is not enough, because you've got to make sure that we can inspire people to want to defend the country.
And the same way you've got to inspire them to work and be productive.
Hugo, very quickly, so I want to go back to the
Yes, talk one or two issues that you asked for. For a social democratic party, as I've said already so far, it has to be the economy, because the economy is fundamental. What the current Labour government has done, it seems to me, is absolutely counterfactual. What they've done is they've hit small and medium businesses with the national insurance rise, and they've shown no willingness to encourage, incentivise new business, new enterprise. So I'm not talking about the big corporations. They're very friendly to the big corporations, but I'm talking about the people who actually provide the jobs and the future of our economy in this country, which is the SMEs, basically, are given no encouragement whatsoever. And in the modern world, in the 21st century, innovation in every field of industry and enterprise is essential. And we won't have enough innovation to beat the competition, if you like, or to stay afloat, unless we have better education. And Richard Phillipson has just started going backwards down towards the road of rotten education. We need all these things need to be done. In other words, we need to have a government which, like Harold Wilson's first administration, prioritised the national economy, prioritised technology, research and development, and did everything it possibly could to encourage British people to be entrepreneurial again, as they had been in the 18th and 19th century. That's what we need.
Thank you. Back there.
Hi, my name is Alistair Bell and I'm the SDP policy spokesman on immigration, industry and energy. And to answer this gentleman's question, I think there are 3 things that are really fundamentally wrong. Number 1...
Can you ask a question? I'm
Phrase the answer to the question.
To say that this is a question and answer for the audience to ask questions of the panel. So
my question is, could the panel expand upon the idea that we need a unified political body and unified so we're not balkanised? Can we talk about how we have to get cheap energy like President Trump is doing so that you can have this huge revival like they're having in the Texas Triangle with cheap energy? And can we also talk about how we've got to invest in industry and not just sell at the first opportunity when private equity comes along and offers you a deal?
Any more questions? Anybody over this side? I feel the weight of the interest, but I'll keep taking people on this side, but at the back.
Hi, I'm Toby, I'm a student here. My question is, do you think we've outsourced decision making to certain experts? Whenever you turn on the TV, you've got an economics expert, you've got an environmental expert, and so on and so on. And because you've outsourced so much decision making to them, their position of power makes us believe that they're always correct, when actually they have secondary interests.
Yeah, really? Not legal experts, I can assure you. Oh, is it not working?
Flick up.
Just click the button on there. There's a little button at the bottom. If you click it on, it's up to okay.
A fundamental reason why politicians are viewed so poorly is because we simply do not pay politicians the right level of remuneration. And as a consequence of that, really poor politicians, really poor individuals enter politics. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew was mentioned earlier on today. One of the key points he made when he first came to power is that you must attract the very best people, and you do that by paying them appropriately. When you think of their lifestyle, which politicians have to do, and the responsibilities, you've got to attract the best people, and therefore you have to, 200,000 a year, you will get top people who can put together effective strategies and get us out of this mire. And no one wants to talk about that.
So the question is, should we pay our politicians?
Well, no, not sure. It's so damn clear that we need to.
Thank you. I'm going to go on. I'll take one more question and then we'll go on. Yes, over here.
Hello. What future do trade unions have in fixing Britain?
That's your question. What future do trade unions have in fixing Britain? So we have that question. We should pay our politicians more, or should we? Are we too dependent on experts, and do we give over too much power to them? And there was the questions about energy there. So you go first.
Yeah, I'd like to answer the question about politicians' pay. I don't think they should be paid anything. The last thing we want is paying these wretched people, these professional politicians, more money. They're the wreckage of this country. They've destroyed it. Since, as I mentioned earlier on, the Harold Wilson...
Along with the LSE academics.
Okay, they should get any money either. But seriously, I think we have to reform our Parliament. And one way that I would do it is by saying that no member of Parliament can ever become a minister, that the ministers are experts and people who know their stuff. They can be paid quite a lot. That's good. But the parliamentarians should be legislators, and we should do our utmost to make sure that none of them are professional politicians, that they represent ordinary people, because the professional politicians have wrecked this country and have turned against the people who elected them.
I think energy, being a Scotsman, is probably the right question to take. We had a bright future based on coal, and the SNP needed the Greens in power to put them in Parliament the last time, so coal became the devil. Sorry, not coal, oil. Did I say coal the first time? I do apologise, I meant oil, it's been a long day. So oil should be the future of Scotland, and we're closing our only remaining refinery, so we will not have no industry. Aberdeen, which was a massive place, I worked up there in 2002, it was a glorious city, very energetic, very rich. It's getting decimated by the day. Because the SNP needed the Greens to put them in power the last election, they had a coalition, so we called oil the bad thing. And we decided that we were going to make our future with wind. And this is how we govern in Scotland, and this is why I'm trying to get up there to be MSP. Because if this is a barometer of what good looks like, I've got a cracking chance, right? So what they've done, they said, we have got 25% of the offshore wind resource in Europe. We can be rich off of that. And the SNP government sold the leases, 80% of the seabed leases, to allow that to generate power. And every single company that we sold them to was foreign. And two of those companies were the national energy companies of countries, one being Spain and one being Norway. So now we have given ourselves no industry in Scotland. And because of this tie-in with the Greens and everything, we would like to believe that Vaseline's bad, nuclear's bad, and think about Chernobyl. Well, motor cars have come on a long way since Chernobyl. Everything's been better, and the energy is now better. But that's where we are in Scotland, and that's how we've governed Scotland. So we have no energy. The stuff that we have loads of, we don't want to take it out of the ground or out of the North Sea. And the other stuff that we've got load of, and that's wind, if anybody's been north of Carlisle, we've got plenty of wind. We've pawned that. So we have no resources left. And we need to change that. We absolutely need to change that. And going on the £200,000 for MPs, if I was part of a society that paid people £200,000 from my tax, I would want to do one thing, and that's interview them and hold them responsible. But we don't interview our MPs, we elect them, and that's why I think it's impossible to justify £200,000 when you have no recall on who gets the job.
Technocrats. So I think if you kind of wind the clock back and look at that Tony Blair government and what it did, I think that's when we kind of went wrong, because all these powers that used to be held by elected politicians were outsourced to bureaucrats, technocrats, who we cannot hold to account. So the most obvious one, giving the Bank of England power over interest rates, I think that should be held by government. We can't unelect the governor of the Bank of England. We can unelect our politicians, and we need to hold them to account. The Supreme Court, another example. The Electoral Commission, another example. And I do think we need to have, a bit of a uprooting of all these unelected bodies and get rid of a fair few of them. Trade unions is a really interesting question. So I think there's only about 5.5 million workers in trade unions now, up to about 28 million workers, and that's largely in the public services. So I don't think trade unions as they exist today have a massive role, but they should do. And there are some new trade unions coming on into the game, and they're quite interesting. So trade unions for Uber drivers, trade unions for some of the Deliveroo kind of people. I think that's quite an interesting development. It'd be interesting to see how that does develop. But don't forget, there is a lot of good work done by trade unions. So I know that one of the budget airlines is at the moment trying to argue very strongly that actually you don't need 2 pilots on a plane. And, who's arguing against that? Who's bringing that to government's attention? Who's doing something about it? BAMPA, the Airline Pilots Association. And of course they have an interest in it, but, it's also a really important issue for us in terms of flight safety. And there's masses of ordinary daily casework that goes on that is good work, and we shouldn't underestimate the value of that. But what I would want trade unions to do, and this is what they used to do, trade unions used to be the first line of defence at disciplining workers who weren't pulling their weight. And that's what trade unions should do. And stop treating everybody like victims and helpless people without agency, and start really harnessing the power of workers.
Yeah, so I think the conversation as usual is only just getting going now, just as we're near the end. So I would say that we're living in a huge time of transformation. Don't underestimate it. The era of globalisation is smashed. It really is. I think that 40 years of no borders, LSE, globalisation, it's over, guys. It's over.